What's up everyone, welcome to Workshop Rebuild. This is my channel where I take apart, clean and reassemble machines to make them fully functional again after a complete teardown on the John Deere 400 Transaxle, which is a Peerless 2514 Transaxle. I'll go ahead and share with you guys the rebuild process. On the white table I have all the parts laid out, everything is clean, so I can reassemble this very soon. Over here on the side table I have some of the new parts which I purchased, which are seals and O-rings, and I'll share them with you guys. You'll find a link down in the description as well, so you guys can purchase these parts yourself. Over here is the main housing, and I'll get into that very soon too. So stick around for the rebuild process. Looking at the white table, I have all the internals of the John Deere 400 Transaxle laid out. Down below is the rear axle with the ring gear and the pinion gears. I will get into that very soon. In my last video, which was the teardown video, I described this as the bull gear. Once I took it apart, I understood it was not a bull gear. It is a ring gear with pinion gears which rotate, and that acts as the differential in the system. Above the axles, we have our transmission part of the rear end. Off to the left, we have the axle housing, and off to the right, we have the other axle housing. I will share with you guys the parts in the middle of the table first, and then I'll move on to some of the bigger parts, and later on, I'll share with you guys what's on the table off to the left. Everything on this table is laid out systematically. This is how I will be reassembling or rebuilding the transmission and transaxle in general. I will start from the top and work my way down. The hydraulic motor powers this bevel gear. This bevel gear is located on the very top, so the hydraulic motor bevel gear will transfer power to this bevel gear. It has an internal spline which will power the top shaft. This is splined as well. So when we look at this, we have our first spacer, which gets mounted on this way. Our bevel gear, which is the input of this transaxle. We have another gear, which is behind the bevel gear. This gear is very important. This will be one of our speeds within this transmission. So when you guys look at this, you guys will see one side is beveled and the other one is straight cut. You guys want to make sure that the bevel side is facing the longer side of the shaft, or this is the outside and the cover plate. We have another spacer, which mounts right after that gear. We have another tooth gear, as well as on this one, we have one side which is beveled, or the other side which is straight cut. You want to make sure that the bevel sides of the gears face each other. This also has an internal spline and will mount directly onto this shaft. On the very end, we have a shim which will make up the width of this whole assembly, and that will be just like that. So now, when we look at this assembly, our hydraulic motor will power this bevel gear, transfer power to one of these gears right here, but these two gears are different because these will power our first or our second gear, which is high and low throughout this transaxle. Looking at the next shaft on this table, this is a very important shaft. It has a smaller spline and a bigger spline cut into it. The bigger spline is power distribution. When we look at the spline, it is very long and it is cut to a certain length, and that will allow us to shift this transmission. This is the next gear. This is one assembly, which has two gears, and in the middle, it is cut free for our shifter lever. So this has an internal spline, and that will mount right onto the external spline. When we push that on, it has room to travel left and right on this main shaft. At the very end of the shaft, we have a spacer, and this will act as a shim to the housing. Off to the left, which I laid out, is our shift lever, and that shift lever has two little tabs, top and bottom, and that will mount around and within the two gears. So now, when we would like to shift from high to low, we will be pulling or pushing, and that will allow us to engage onto our top shaft, which is this shaft over here, when we engage to first or second, we have these shafts under each other, and we can choose then from first to second just like that. All these parts will be reviewed within the housing once more when the assembly is together, but I am sharing it with you guys dry. On the end of this shaft, to make up the size once again, we have another shim or washer, and that will mount just like this on the shifter shaft. The next shaft, which receives power, is the pinion shaft. That is this big shaft right here. As you guys can see, there is a major spline and it's very long. But then we have the teeth cut off to a certain diameter, and that will house our biggest gear within this whole assembly. The ring gear is very big, but this is our power distribution gear, and this will mount on the back side of this shaft like so. This receives power from the shifter shaft above, and the pinion shaft, which is on the right of this gear, will transfer power to our ring gear. On the back end and on the front end of the shaft, we have two washers, once again, on the back side and on the front side to make up the plate. So I just shared with you guys the top three shafts. You guys will understand now that the power transfers from the bevel gear onto the shifter shaft. You can choose from high and low. That transfers power to the pinion shaft through this big gear. Once the pinion shaft is turning, it will transfer power to our ring gear. In my teardown video, I first thought this was a bull gear, just like I had on my Bolins, since it was the exact same size and it looked identical. But when I took it apart, I found out that this is a ring and pinion gear setup. So once the ring gear is turning, we have to transmit power to the next object, and the next object is this spacer for the pinion gears. When you look at it, it has 4 little cutouts for these pinion gears, which are below. Then on this spacer, we have the tab, which gets inserted within this ring gear. This tab will then locate within this ring gear, like so. And now I can look at the pinion gears. These pinion gears get inserted within the spacer, obviously all 4 at a time. When I take the other spacer and I will insert this onto the other side, you will notice that these halves are offset. When I share with you guys the pinion spacers and the ring gear, you guys will understand that they are offset by exactly 1 gear. So when I place one of these pinion gears, which is on the first side or the back side, you will see that it's halfway offset. So now I will take another pinion gear from the other setup and place it in there, and they will mesh exactly in the middle, but only a certain distance. So now when this is spinning on one side right here, you will see the other side spins as well. I hope you guys can see that. And now when I add 4 on one side and 4 on the other side, they will just all spin uniformly. Once the pinion gears are inserted within the ring gear, it will look something like this. And now there should be enough space for the axle, which is this part over here, to mount on top of this assembly. When we look at the axle, there is a spline on the inside, there is a cut gear, there is a washer, and there is this hub. Now, when I want to put this all together, I will place this gear within the pinion gears down below. I have to make sure that they mesh nicely. And I will locate it so I can add bolts later on. And this will house our whole axle assembly down below. So I just shared with you guys all 3 shafts which make up the transmission. I shared with you guys the ring and the pinion gears which make up the rear differential. Now I'll go ahead and share with you guys some of the external parts, so some of the castings which belong to this rear end. So I just shared with you guys the transmission, the ring gear, and the pinion gears, as well as both axles left and right. Off to the left and off to the right, we have the axle housings. These will house our axles. So once everything is mounted, these axles will be within this housing. On the bottom end, we have room for a tapered roller bearing, which is this bearing right here. This is a special Timken roller bearing, tapered roller bearing, excuse me. And this will be mounted right within this cavity. This tapered roller bearing gets housed in this area right here. And the main housing will have a needle bearing which rides on this hub. Around this tapered roller bearing, we will have a special seal, and I'll share that with you guys very soon. On the top end of this housing, we have a shaft or an axle seal, and down below we have another bearing. I did not take this apart since these seals were still in great condition, but all these seals and O-rings in this video will be down in the description below. This axle housing is exactly identical to the one on the other side, so I don't have to get into that. They are exactly identical and they have the exact same purpose. On the far left and on the far right, we have 6 bolts as well as 3 more with this plate. These 6 bolts mount around the perimeter of this axle housing and they mount to the main block, which is right there. 6 bolts. The 2 longest ones of these 6 mount through this support plate, and this plate then bolts to our John Deere main frame. These 3 bolts get placed within these 3 bores, and these will mount to the main frame. So I shared with you guys the rest of the parts on the white table. Now we'll go ahead onto the side table and I'll share with you guys the new products I ordered, and I'll share with you guys the main block. I have the main block on the right of the screen, the cover plate, which is above. I have the oil level tubes, which are right over here. I have new parts within these 3 bags, and I have the old parts laid out as well. I will start with the new parts right away, and then I'll move on to the main block. One of the parts that I purchased was the shifter shaft seal. So this is a very small seal. This will be housed within the top cover, and it wraps around the shifter shaft, which is right now still installed into the main block. I purchased that, and this is the brand new seal over here in the bag. Perfectly new, and it is a double lip seal, so this will be very good. The second seal, which I went to purchase, is a double lip seal once again, but it is much bigger in diameter, and this will mount around the shifter shaft itself. So that is this shaft. So that is this shaft over here. This is the shaft which I shared with you guys before. This shifts from first to second gear or high to low, and this shaft mounts around the perimeter of this shaft like so. This shaft in general has a key sticking outside of the main block. I read a little bit about this online, and some models, not necessarily John Deere or John Deere 400s, they had an optional brake disc right here on this shaft. It could be that you'd want to stop that to then shift into first or second gear, and that's why this is external from the main block, and that's why it is still painted black. They do have a key slot, so you guys can insert a key right here. It is possible that this is an option for different brands. So that right there is the seal, the old one, and right here I have the brand new one. These are the only 2 seals that I did change. The axle seals will be listed down in the description. Mine are still good, so I did not have to exchange them. 2 more parts which I purchased are the 2 seals. These are special seals. They are square cut, so you guys can see they are square in the profile. These are brand new, and these will mount around the tapered roller bearings, which are housed within the axle housing. So this seal will mount around the tapered roller bearing, something like that, and be housed within the axle housing. These 2 are brand new, and the links as well as the sizes are down in the description below. So enough talk on the new parts, and the old parts, I'll put these aside. So in the middle of the screen, I have the oil level tube. This is the old one. There is a top part and a bottom part on this, and in between they have a breather. This breather was still good, but I just updated the 2 little tubes. The old one is very hard, so it could possibly break, and it's discolored. There's red from the automatic transmission fluid. So obviously old, and I just replaced both sides. This is a very simple fix. I believe this is just a 3/8 or a 1/2 inch tube, nothing too serious. I just updated this because it looks much better, and then you'll see your oil level precisely. So we'll put this aside and I'll share with you guys the cover plate. This is the cover plate for the Transaxle. This is the main housing. So this cover plate goes on top of this main housing. In this area, or in this recess, we have our shifter shaft seal. That is the small seal from before. That will mount right away in there. So we'll be inserting the new one very soon. Down below, we have the mounting area for the axle housing. This is aluminum, and this mounts then to a cast axle housing. So when you want to merge these two parts, you want to make sure that this surface is perfectly flat. I did notice from factory, I believe, since probably nobody had this apart before, that there were some chips on this surface. So I scraped them down with a scraper, and now it's flush. You really want to make sure that this is flat and that there's no burr in any point of this surface, because that will throw off your axle housing, and if that's the case, you could damage your seals internally or even some of your bearings. So it's really important to keep these surfaces clean. I think nobody had this apart, and if there were chips here from the factory, that's obviously not good quality control in general. But this is the outside of the cover, and looking at the inside, we have 4 needle bearings. We have 2 on the top, 1 directly in the middle, and then 1 below. The biggest needle bearing right here will wrap around one of the axle hubs that is down below. We have the middle shaft, which is the output. This is the pinion shaft. The needle bearing, which is above over here, holds the shifter shaft, and this needle bearing holds the input shaft, which has the bevel gear. There's not much to talk about on the cover plate, but I will go ahead and share with you guys the main housing. Since I was already at it and I do have gasket material laying around at home, I went ahead and cut out my own gasket. The old gasket was still in good condition, but what you can do as well is take your cover plate, put it down on a flat piece of paper or even some gasket material, and trace the outside perimeter. And then after you trace the outside perimeter, you can always trace the inside diameter of your gasket. So I made a completely new gasket. I'm not sure if you can purchase these anywhere online, but I just find it easier to cut my own gaskets here. We previously just looked at the cover plate, and you guys will see there are 4 needle bearings in this cover plate. In the main housing, there's the exact same setup, but is obviously a mirrored image. So we have the biggest needle bearing, which is down below, a middle needle bearing, that is a shifter shaft needle bearing, and the input shaft needle bearing. As you guys can see, this makes a little bit more sense. So when our beveled gear from the hydraulic motor protrudes through this area, it'll then power the bevel gear, which is on the input shaft. That is in this area, so it is very close to the input of this transaxle. Then the shifter shaft is right here. This corresponds with this shaft. This is basically the shaft that you want to be pulling on or pushing in to change your gear from high to low. So just like that, you can pull it out and push it back in like that. So this will choose your neutral, high, or low position. Down below is our pinion shaft. That is the location. And right there in that position will be our axle. Down below, we have our pickup tube fitting. This mounts directly to the aluminum housing, and the tube will then go into the hydraulic motor. That's how the hydraulic motor gets its oil. The oil will be up to this level, somewhere around here. This is where the sight tube will be. The level will be up to this height. All this is filled with oil all the time, and our hydraulic motor will pick up oil from here, go off through the hydraulic motor, and it'll be thrown back into this chamber through this little cavity over here. I will flip this around so you guys will see the other side of it as well. Over here is our bottom level for our sight tube. So I will be mounting this on this height, and the top half will be somewhere over here. So that's how our side tube will look like eventually, and then the level will be in between this point and this point. I'll get into that very soon. On the rear end of this main housing, everything has been cleaned up. The surface which the axle mounts to is very clean, and we have an output which is this side. There is a needle bearing, and this is where the shifter shaft protrudes outside of the housing, and we will have to insert our double lip seal in this area. Looking at this assembly from the front, we have 4 threads cut into this front, and here will be our hydraulic motor eventually. So I shared with you guys a whole bunch of information on the transmission, the ring gear and pinion gear setup, the axle halves, the main block, the cover, and some of the parts I purchased. I did enough talking, and now let's get straight to the rebuild part of this video, and I will share with you guys a time lapse. I believe that's the best way of showing this. I don't do much talking, but I discuss everything before I rebuild it so you guys understand what is involved here. And then later on, once the time lapse comes around, you guys can just follow along without me talking and just assemble it like I do. So let's
giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, well, I don't wanna jinx it, baby, and twist myself at the spine. Don't wanna overthink it, baby. It's just twist your body and mine. Baby, you give me ice and fire. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. You whip up my appetite. Don't leave me here high and dry. Oh, but I don't wanna jinx it, baby. Let's not get ahead of my time. Oh, but I don't wanna miss you, baby. So I stay.
We'll stop right here. I finalized the John Deere 400 rear end. Everything went on super smooth. Everything mounted great. The bearings were intact. The seals pushed in very nice. The brakes were super simple to install. There is one spring. You guys have to be cautious. Wear your safety glasses when you're installing that spring. Everything that I showed you guys on screen, you guys can do too. It's very easy. There's nothing hard about this assembly. If you do have damaged gears or something internally is defect, you may have to replace that. I do not exactly know where you guys can find gears. Your best bet would be just to type it in online under the Peerless 2514 transmission or Transaxle. That's the manufacturer of this rear end, but you guys can probably type in something with John Deere 400 or something in that manner. I will give you guys a close-up view on this clean and fresh rebuilt Transaxle of the John Deere 400. You guys will see everything is perfectly clean. The only thing that's missing is a perfect paint job to go with this freshly rebuilt rear end. And if you guys like this video, please hit that like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. Tap that bell notification down below as well, so you'll be one of the first to see my videos when they go live. And if you have any comments, leave your comments down below. I'll get back to you as soon as possible. So stay tuned for the next video.